Hello and welcome to a slightly different setup and a slightly different sort of video today. I'm going to be counting down all of the books that I read in 2021 and doing these tier things that you've probably seen on the internet, on other channels anyway. So what I'm going to do is just go through the categories that I've put on the screen. I put L, which you'd expect to see S. I guess that means superior normally, but in this instance I'm going with literary. So something that has to be of a very high standard, but also have that extra little something that makes it worth studying even, rather than just reading. And then you've got A, B, C, passing grades, D, bubbling under, and then anything that I would put in F would be a total failure. And I might be quite harsh, but this is going to be a little bit more specific than my normal video reviews where I just give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So let's begin. And the first book that I read in 2021, which I might have actually started reading in 2020, would have been Light of the Jedi by Charles Saul. It's the first book of the new era that they're trying to make happen in Star Wars. So let's have a look and see if I can find it on the list. There it is. And not an outright failure. Mediocre at best, perhaps slightly less than mediocre effort. I thought, didn't really like it, just really bland, like a lot of Star Wars stuff has been. I mean, the expanded universe, I know it's sacrilege to criticize, but it's always been a little bit hit and miss, and I felt this one was more miss than hit. Second book that I read was by Harry Harrison, I think, which was a little bit of a departure for what I'd been reading previously by him, which were all comedies, and this was more like an apocalyptic thriller. I can't see it on the list. I don't know. I think that somewhere out there's a Harry Harrison book that is just mind-blowingly good, because everything I've read of his has hints that it's going to be something really spectacular, but then kind of underwhelms a little bit. Third one would be The Sisters Brothers, which is a Western, fairly modern Western, was made into a film 3-4 years ago with John C. Reilly and Joaquin Phoenix. Film's terrible, but the book is actually not too bad at all. I quite enjoyed it. I don't know if I would give it any higher than a C though, decent though it was. So then we had Alan Norse's Blade Runner, which I read because obviously I wanted to see where the title for the movie Blade Runner came from. Having read Do Androids Dream, that was in my last year's recap. I don't know, it underwhelmed. I felt like it just never really came together, and the writing style of Norse was kind of bland, pedestrian, really. Not anything there to make me go, oh yeah, you should definitely check this out, I felt, but not awful. So the next one that I read was Stone Cold, which is a book that is a regular on GCSE English courses, which is why I read it, because obviously last year I was working as an English teacher. Yeah, it's not bad, and might even be perhaps higher than a C if it wasn't for the fact that it's kind of cynical in the way it manipulates emotions, which I think when it's aimed at kids, I don't really like that much. But the book overall is fairly decent. So the next one that I read was Slave Girl of Gore, which I read to see because obviously you expect it to be appalling, and the reputation it has is that it's appalling. I'm going to whack it in there for now, but I have to say that there were parts of it that weren't awful. I mean, a lot of it wasn't, and there was actually real potential there, I think, to make something half decent out of it as well, but it just dragged on for too long, and the sex stuff was just gratuitous. So I'm going with D rather than F. The next one was Puppet on a Chain, which is Alistair MacLean, but on this one it just did not hold my attention. It just seemed a little bit silly, like there's a whole village in on the drug trade, and you think that just isn't going to happen, and the fact that the cover of it is a like a tourist village as well. You just like, that is ridiculous. You're just asking for trouble. So I didn't really think that it was one of MacLean's stronger efforts. I'm going to pop that. Although when I put it next to The Slave Girl of Gore and Blade Runner, I think that might be a little harsh. I'm going to put it in there and we'll see. Like I said, I'm beginning to wonder that I'm just going to have everything's going to be a C or a D, and I might have to revisit some of them. The next one I read was Spartacus. I'm reading over a series of several years all of the books that Stanley Kubrick turned into films. So that was another one, and I have to say that some of it's quite good, but the way it's written is just so unnecessarily complicated, or even really you could say convoluted, in that it just plays with the timeline so much. Like the story of Spartacus is such a good story, so or inspiring really, the way they fought for their freedom, and you just think, just tell that story, tell it linear, start to finish. I mean, when they made the film they did, but the book is nothing like that. So I'm going to pop the book, I'm going to pop it in C. I absolutely wouldn't go any higher than that, but at the risk of filling out the D, I think perhaps you could even argue that it belongs in there. The next one I read was William S. Burroughs' Blade Runner the movie, which is just, for want of a better word, a bastardization of Norris. It's absolutely terrible, and just there is no reason for it to exist. It's just worthless, and there's been a few little additions to it which are just terrible. I get a little bit of hate on the review of that from occasional comments and things, and it's just, but I just don't see what the attraction is. It's just awful. And if you read Norris's version, then it adds nothing at all. It's just slightly worse. It's like, why did you do it then? The next book, again, was one that I had to read for school. It's The Great Gatsby. Can't see it in the thumbnails. There it is. I'm going to go straight with L. Okay, The Great Gatsby, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with, in that I didn't particularly enjoy reading it. And then when I had to teach it to year 9, so you're talking like 13 years old, they could not access it. The language was far too complicated for them. And then they just basically made my life hell for trying to teach it to them. And yeah, it was not a fun experience trying to teach it. I didn't enjoy reading it. I don't think any of the kids do. But in the process of teaching it, I actually gained a new appreciation for it, strangely enough, despite the comeback that I was getting. And yeah, I actually, again, I wouldn't describe it as enjoyable, but I think there's something wonderful about it. And something brilliant about it is undeniable. So I'm putting that straight in the top category. Next one I read was the novelization of Catwoman. The novelization of Catwoman. I don't want the neighbours to hear that I've read it. That's going straight into F. It was, in defence of the author, I think that the failings of it, which are legion, were failings at script level. So yeah, not necessarily the author of the novelization's fault that that's as terrible as it is, but it is terrible. It was Rebirth, which has another name, and I can't remember what it was. Rebirth is the American name. It's John Wyndham. I think it's a Chrysalids or something everywhere else, but I'm popping that into A. That was a really good science fiction book, much better than the majority of what I've read this book. Nothing like as good as The Day of the Triffids, which is Wyndham's masterpiece, but yeah, really solid and very enjoyable, very short, so you can read it in a flash, and there's not really much to dislike. It really has a good tension where it needs one, and then like builds in the right way towards the end. So I think, yeah, a really good effort. Next one that I read was Stephen King. It was Carrie. I read it because I have a volume of King books. There's like more than this. I think there's 4 in it or something like that. And I read Carrie because it was the shortest one. I was thinking I might bring back the book versus film series that I did right at the start of this channel, which nobody really watched. But in the end, I just couldn't find the time to watch the film. But Carrie is a decent effort, and I quite liked it, so I'm going to pop that into B. At least I'm not filling out the C's and just C all the way along. The next one that I read was Icons, which I can't remember who it's by, but it's by one of the people that wrote Beautiful Creatures, which I quite enjoyed, but I did not like Icons at all. I didn't really see anything really to recommend it in there. Really long, really silly, like a book for teenage girls, really, and I kind of find that insulting that you would expect so little of teenage girls that they couldn't access a better text than that. But yeah, I thought that was kind of rubbish. Ferguson Rifle was next, which is Louis L'Amour. It was a Western. Not brilliant. Lacked a little bit of energy, but there's a love there for the era that really comes across, so I didn't mind that at all. I'd give that a solid C. Now the next one was Exocet by Jack Higgins, which I'm putting in the D. I did not like it. I did not like the fact that the plot was unnecessarily convoluted for like a thing about the Argentina, Great Britain war for the Falklands. Just pick a side. He tried to make his Argentinian guy like a hero as well. And it's like, no, you actually do have to have a villain. You do. And then it's like this guy's trying to fit up his ex-girlfriend with a new boyfriend. I didn't like any part of it, really. The characters were bizarre, not likeable, unbelievable. The situation was ridiculous. The Argentinian guy's portrayed as intelligent, but he doesn't see through some really terrible, convoluted way of trying to move the plot along. They're just nonsense. I didn't like that at all. The next one is Martin Pig, which is another school book, and I'm going to go straight into B with that one. It's a little bit dark. I mean, I was teaching it to year 8, so you're talking 13, definitely, perhaps even 12, maybe some 14s in the group. A little bit dark for them, but they did seem to really enjoy it, although most of them did express a degree of disappointment at lacking a real twist in the end. But I quite like it, and I think that there's a lot there to recommend it, so I'm quite comfortable with that being in the Bs. So just put the other light on because it was getting a bit dark in here. It was getting hard to see. So where did we get to? Martin Pig, I think. And the next one was The City by Stella Gemmell. I don't know, it lacked the energy or the brilliance or just the storytelling, really, that David Gemmell brings. I didn't hate it, but there's a lot wrong with it. I would really sort of put it on a cusp of C and D, so I'm unsure. I mean, I think I'll go with C, but if C gets full, I'll see if it needs to be bumped down one. The next one was Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which for me was just a waste of time. It's kind of like just taking the original and then occasionally writing in, oh, there was a zombie there or something like that. It's just really kind of much lazier and less original or creative than I thought it would be. Next one up was the Galactic Whirlpool, which I'm going to put in C. It's Star Trek, and it's the original series, and it's really nice to see Kirk and Spock handled quite well, which they were in this by David Grohl, who was one of the scriptwriters of the TV series, so you would expect it to be a fairly solid effort. Adventure, I think the biggest criticism that I levelled at it in my review was that it does rather resemble a couple of Robert Heinlein's short stories. But other than that, handled pretty well, I thought. The next one for me was a real joy. It was one of those David Gemmell books that I hadn't read, that I was saving because him having died of quite a few years ago now. Obviously he doesn't write. There are no books coming out, although the Desmond Bagley book came out a good 25 years, maybe even 30 after he died. So you never know, there might be some other David Gemmell manuscript out there somewhere that hasn't been published yet, but I saved a few that I hadn't read, and The White Wolf, or just White Wolf rather, was one of those, and I read it and thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a real joy actually at the time that I read it, coming off the back of a bunch of books that I was either made to read or didn't really like. And then I read that, and obviously the Whirlpool before, so it was kind of like a couple of really nice nostalgic adventures to get my teeth into, which was actually followed up by one which I had no experience of at all, which was I think it's Larry Niven. I can't really read that. My eyes are terrible. I think it's Larry Niven and its Legacy of Hiro, which is going in. Tough. I'm going to go with B for now. Not just because I don't want C to be full, but I actually really did enjoy it. And I can't really think of any criticisms I had beyond perhaps some mild issues with the terraforming or character. But other than that, I thought it was a really solid effort. I would definitely read more from both the authors. It's Larry Niven, Jerry Pournelle, and I think somebody else as well, but I don't know who off the top of my head. I thought that was a really good effort. I liked it. I would read more from them. I would read more in that series, but it's just a question of whether I can actually find a copy. Silverberg, Stepsons of Terror was next. I'm going to put that into C. It's a time-travelling plot. It kind of, whenever you have a time-travelling plot, unless you're Robert Heinlein, you're going to have issues of, well, why didn't they just do that instead? They've got a time machine, they can do anything they like. And there's quite a bit of that, I think, in that. But generally, it's a solid enough adventure. It's kind of fun, and I think that it's enjoyable. And even though it's got some faults, it being enjoyable is enough to get into the C bracket. The next one was my second book that I'd ever read by Jt Edson, and it is his version of Tarzan. It's Baldacci. There it is. And I'm popping that in D because I really thought that was... I thoroughly enjoyed the first Jt Edson book I read, which was Quiet Town, but I just couldn't get into this. It wasn't as good as Tarzan. It wasn't as good as his westerns. As I recall, I just think it was kind of boring because Baldacci himself was just like perfect and immaculate and could do no wrong, and then Dawn turned out to be more or less the same. So it's like, well, you know, what's the point of reading this? There's no adventure if there's no peril, and there's no peril if everybody's perfect and infallible. So yeah, I didn't really like it. I've read better Jt Edson before and since. The next one, speaking of westerns, was the novelization of Wyatt Earp, Kevin Costner film, and I'm going to give that a C. I seem to recall that my review might have been a little more negative than intended, but that's fairly typical for me. I am a bit of a grump, and I don't know. I didn't mind it. I think they just tried to do a little bit too much and then didn't end up doing enough of the important stuff. Perhaps they needed to be a bit more careful what was included and what wasn't, but decent enough. And Wyatt Earp is one of those figures that is just endlessly fascinating anyway. The next one was Willie Heinrich's Crumbling Fortress. That I didn't like that very much at all. As I recall, it was quite dull, convoluted. The characters were a little bit bizarre. Just the way it was written as well. I mean, I guess there might have been some translation involved. I just couldn't get into it. I didn't like any part of it really, but it wasn't sort of the outright awful that earns you an F. So then we were back with Higgins after Exocet. I was like, I've enjoyed Higgins before. I want to read some more. I want to try something else. And Solo was next. That has a different name for like a reissued version of it that had a few changes made. I quite liked it. It was an upgrade on Exocet. It was one of those cat and mouse things. There was a few things in there that you just think, that why have you put that in there? That doesn't really help develop either character. And when you have that sort of protagonist foil situation going on, then you really do want to just explore that as much as possible. And I felt that perhaps that part of it wasn't as strong as it could have been, but at least it wasn't anything like as dull or convoluted as Exocet. The next one was The Unquiet Grave by Peter J. Evans, which is a 2000 AD tie-in, as in the British comic. It features Durham Red, the mutant vampire. It's hard to explain it as anything other than just really quite average. There's nothing particularly bad about it. There's nothing spectacularly good about it either. And I don't know, that it seemed like the focus is on the wrong character, because Durham Red works better as a side character or as one of those characters that's bringing an edge, a little bit of danger that's unexplored, that's unavailable to our heroes. Much like when she was working with Johnny Alpha in the comics, here the writer should have written this from Judith Harrow's perspective and just kept Red's thoughts to herself, so that she's just there and an unknown entity, an unpredictable entity through the text. I think that would have worked better. The next one was David Baldacci, Memory Man. Now, I think that this probably should be in the C's. I don't think it's quite good enough for B. No, I'm going to give it a B just because C will get full otherwise. But Baldacci, for me, is interchangeable in many ways with Lee Child. There's a lot of similarities. I like Lee Child. I enjoy it. It's a little bit of a guilty pleasure, I'll grant you, but I do enjoy it. And I borrowed this off a friend and enjoyed it, and gave them a Lee Child in return, which they enjoyed, and agreed that there was quite a lot of similarities between the two, not just in the fact that the protagonists are hulking, but in the sort of style of the way they write, the way they build tension, and the way they create excitement with like the short chapters, and there's nothing particularly difficult or inaccessible about their writing style. So yeah, I think very interchangeable. I'm giving it a B, but it really is on the cusp of a C. The next one is Frank Herbert's Whipping Star, which could easily end up down here, but I'm going to squeeze it in the D's at the moment. Really, really disappointing. The only things I'd read from Frank Herbert before were June books. I'd read the first 3. At that point, I'd had enough of that series and stopped. But the first 2 June books, and particularly the first one, are really, really good. And the way he writes is above and beyond typically what you would expect in the genre, apart from in The Whipping Star, which is just like he couldn't be bothered himself, and then none of it makes any sense and none of it's interesting. It's just relentlessly boring, and that's, the more I think about it, the more I want to dump it down into an F. But the 3 that are in there are significantly worse than the others, so they deserve that slot to themselves, I think. What did I read next? The next one was The Big Hun by Jt Edson, which means I am going to need another row in the C's, because there you go. Wasn't as good as Quiet Town. It was significantly better than Bunduki. It's a real return to what Jt Edson does best, I think, which is the faux western. This one, the story was really quite lacking, but the characters were, well, as likeable as the likes of Dusty Fogg and people like that. So yeah, I did enjoy it. It wasn't one of his best, I don't think, but it was decent. So the next one is Bonfire by Kristen Ritter. Actually going straight into D. There's not even any doubt in my mind that's where it belongs. Not a terrible book, but just so seen it all before, so unoriginal. There's nothing new here. There's nothing that's done particularly well. I mean, it was her first book, and she's more famous as an actress. I don't know, I've never seen anything with her in, but that isn't surprising given that I don't watch a lot of TV. But yeah, just one of those books that just, it's not even a thick book, but it still feels like a slog because it's just so unoriginal, and there's just nothing going on in terms of the writing style to make you go, there's some real talent here, I really want to explore this. The next one is Farewell, My Lovely, my second Raymond Chandler book, and the second in the Philip Marlowe series. But Marlowe I would have put, the first one, Big Sleep, I would have put as A, perhaps B if I was feeling harsh, but right near the top. But this one for me just didn't have, I mean, the first one had originality as well as sort of the sardonic wit, and the sort of the plot made a little bit more sense and got where it needed to go a little bit quicker. This one felt like it just lagged in a few places, like it just lacked a little something. It didn't quite have that sparkle of the original for me. Next we have expecting somebody taller. We're expecting someone taller. I want to say Tom Holt, but I might be wrong because you can see that the author's been cut off there. The retelling of Wagner's Ring of the Nibelungs, might be wrong. Really, really good start. Really good start. The more I think about the ending, the more I'm like, ugh. But really, like, the first 2 acts are good. There's a lot of humour in there, which is a comedy, so it's achieving what it set out to do. So, you know, perhaps if I was feeling that ending, I might bump it down to C, but I'm comfortable enough with it being in the Bs. The next one I read, which is Charles Dickens, it's the Chimes. And it pains me to put Dickens in the C because obviously you'd expect him to be in the literary category, you'd expect it to be brilliant. Just underwhelmed. It wasn't as good as The Christmas Carol. The themes were not as universal. It felt like Dickens was trying to recapture what he did before rather than as inspired as he was when he wrote The Christmas Carol. So the Chimes, I'm giving a C. The next one was Steel Helmet, which is a real pulp cult war book. I can't even remember who it's by. I think Charles Packman, correct me if I'm wrong. Ridiculous pace, one skirmish after another, just leading to another, just always like a quiet moment is the blink of an eye, and then there's another skirmish, more fighting. It's absolutely breathtaking for like the first 80% of the book. Loses its way just a little bit, and the epilogue or the final chapter is just awful and really, really ought to have been cut. But other than that, a really enjoyable war book. The next one was Woman in Black by Susan Hill. I'm going to give that an A, though doubtless quite a few of my students would dispute that and perhaps think it should be lower. It's just part of what really helps is that it is so short, but it really does create a sort of spooky atmosphere. It creates that by playing on sort of known phobias, common phobias. It's just a really good gothic ghost story and really quite a lot of fun, I think, for a lot of people, even in school. So the fact that they forced to read it obviously takes some of the fun out of it, but a decent effort and very enjoyable. So yeah, I'm quite happy to give that an A. I've lent that to my mum. She likes Daniel Radcliffe. We'll see how that works out. I think we're running out of books really rapidly. What's left? Michael Moorcock, Warlord of the Air. Yeah, I'm going to give that a D. I think to put it in with the others, yeah, well, maybe it's not significantly better than Icons, so perhaps I was harsh on Icons, but yeah, it wasn't good. And it had like an interesting setup, but then just did not do anything with it. And then it just lectures you for 30 pages about how great communism is, which you hope there's hints in there that Moorcock perhaps understands that what he's working with is propaganda and isn't intended to take this as an endorsement of communism, but at the same time, knowing a little bit about him, it wouldn't surprise me if it was. But the significant issue with that is that it's boring, and the political hectoring. I mean, I'm not one of these, get your politics out. If you're going to put your politics in, make your story interesting as well. And just to show that politics overriding an author's common sense and ruining the story is not a new phenomenon. That's from 1971. It's still terrible. So a well-deserved B. Perhaps I could even bump it down one, but there is some bits and pieces there that are quite good. Like Bastille's not a bad character, not until the end anyway, and the steampunk sort of style is quite fun. There's enough about it, I say, to just drag it out of an F. So that was my list. The best book by far is The Great Gatsby, but it's not by any means the most enjoyable. That would be The White Wolf and Rebirth and Woman in Black rather, coming in third. Any one of those in B is worth your time, particularly if you're interested in the war books. Then definitely Steel Helmet is great. If you're interested in fantasy and mythology, then Tom Holt's book will be quite entertaining to you, I think. Baldacci's solid thriller. Legacy of Hiro, again, if you've got that interest in mythology, then you will see where the inspiration for that comes from. Martin Pigg, really good book for schools as well. And Carrie, a decent effort. And the last 3 books in there, I almost feel a little bit bad for the Catwoman being in the same category with the other 2. You know, if you're writing a novelization, you're likely working with a script, or from a script, or from having seen a copy of the film, which probably wasn't even finished at the time you saw it. So, you know, it's up to you to do a little bit more with it if you can. And I think it's Elizabeth Hand, or Elizabeth Head. Elizabeth Hand, I'll go with. Didn't really add enough, but didn't really do anything that was particularly bad either. I still haven't seen the film. I've been looking out for it just to see if some of the really terrible parts of the book, the parts of the book that make you go, why is that in here, were in the film as well. But I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Thank you everybody for checking out this video. Thank you everybody that checked out any of the other videos over 2021. Have a happy new year, and I will see you undoubtedly in 2022 for more of this sort of thing.